down these dark hollers and forgotten roads. They say the past truly never dies. Here in the heart of Appalachia, a war was fought not for a flag, but for corn liquor. It was a war of ambush in the dark, where family feuds and government raids exploded into a series of brutal, unsolved murders. We're uncovering the violent history of the bootlegger's code, a code that meant some secrets were worth killing for, and some were taken to the grave. This is the story of how moonshine, money, and mountain justice collided, leaving a trail of bodies and questions that still echo through the hills. To understand this forgotten conflict, you first have to understand the land and the people who call it home. For centuries, the Appalachian Mountains have been a place of isolation and fierce independence. For the Scotch-Irish settlers who first carved out a life here, distilling whiskey wasn't a crime, it was a tradition, a part of the culture they brought over from the old country. More than that, it was often a matter of economics. In a cash-poor farming economy, corn was currency, but hauling bulky sacks of corn over treacherous mountain roads was often a losing game. The solution was simple: convert that corn into liquid form. A single horse could carry 10 times the value in whiskey as it could in raw corn. This wasn't just about making a drink. This was a vital way to make a living, pay property taxes, and feed a family when the soil was thin and the winters were long. For generations, this was just the way things were. The water of life was an important part of the mountain economy. Then the outside world intervened. The trouble really started not long after America itself was born. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton's new federal government slapped an excise tax on whiskey, sparking a violent frontier uprising known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Though that tax came and went, others followed, and the conflict simmered for decades. After the Civil War, the government, desperate for revenue, hit distilled spirits with another heavy tax, and the old fight was reignited with a vengeance. To the fiercely independent mountain folk, this felt like a tax on their very survival. They didn't stop making whiskey, they just stopped telling the government about it. They went underground, into the deep woods and hidden hollers, running their stills by the light of the moon. And so the moonshiner was born. With this law came a new enemy, the federal revenue agent, or the revenuer. These men were tasked with hunting down and destroying illegal stills, and to many mountain communities, they were a foreign invading force. This set the stage for a long, simmering conflict. On one side, the tight-knit families who produced the moonshine. On the other, the government agents sworn to stop them. Now, this wasn't a simple cops and robbers affair. While many arrests were made without a shot being fired, the tension was always there. It was a clash of cultures, federal law versus mountain tradition. And in the isolated hollers of Tennessee, North Carolina, and Kentucky, this clash would sometimes escalate into a brutal, undeclared war where disputes weren't settled in court, but with an ambush in the dark. It was a conflict with its own unwritten rules, a violent code where an accusation could be a death sentence and silence was the highest law. Our story begins in the late 19th century in a place known for its serene beauty, but which was once a crucible of a mountain conflict, Cades Cove, Tennessee. A rugged corner of the cove known as Chestnut Flats had earned a reputation as a lawless enclave where families like the Powells and the Birchfields ran both legal and illegal distilleries. The local Maryville Times often reported on drunken brawls and shooting matches, painting the mountain communities as wild and violent. Into this tense world came a young man named George Washington Powell Jr. He was just 26, a husband and father to 3 young children, with another on the way. Like many in the flats, he was no stranger to the world of illegal whiskey, but he was about to become a casualty to its ruthless code. On the late afternoon of December the 11th, 1897, George Powell was in his own yard playing with his kids. The day was fading, the shadows stretching long. Then suddenly, the crack of a rifle shattered the peace of the holler. Powell was hit. He staggered, mortally wounded, backwards towards his cabin and collapsed in front of his horrified wife, Martha. Terrified, the gunmen were still lurking in the woods. Martha barred the door and waited with her dying husband and her children through the long, dark night, too afraid to go for help. And by morning, George Powell Jr. was dead. Why such a brutal ambush carried out in front of a man's own children? It all came down to the moonshiner's deepest fear: betrayal. George Powell had been summoned to be a witness against a prominent local moonshiner, Sam Longhair Birchfield. In the world of Chestnut Flats, cooperating with the law, especially the hated revenuers, was an unforgivable sin. It was a violation of the code. For months, the murder remained officially unsolved. The community, bound by fear and a deep distrust of outside authority, went silent. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. This was the code of silence in action. The law, however, was persistent. Months later, they arrested L. Hughes, the son-in-law of Sam Birchfield. Hughes was convicted and sentenced to 20 years. From his cell, he penned a letter that laid the crime bare. He confessed that both he and Sam Birchfield had laid in wait that day, determined to kill George Powell. They had planned to get him on the road, but finding him at home, they just took up their positions near the house. According to Hughes, it was Birchfield who fired the fatal shot, though Hughes admitted he would have done the same if Powell had come his way. With the confession, the law moved in on Sam Birchfield. The Maryville Times described him as a formidable figure, a 60-year-old man over 6 feet tall, with long black hair and a reputation as a notorious moonshiner. The murder of George Powell wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated execution. It was a message to anyone else who might think about breaking the code. The ambush in Cades Cove was a brutal sign that the simmering conflict was boiling over into a war fought with bullets and blood, where mountain justice was swift, final, and delivered from the shadows. As the 20th century dawned and the nation marched toward prohibition, the stakes in the moonshine game got a whole lot higher. The 18th Amendment passed in 1920, and it was meant to dry up the country, but in the mountains, it was like gasoline on a fire. The demand for illegal liquor skyrocketed, turning what had been a supplemental income into potentially massive enterprises. This influx of money and pressure didn't unite the mountain clans. It often turned them against each other, and sometimes it turned them against themselves. A perfect, bloody example is the saga of the Daltrey family of Morgan County, Tennessee. In the rugged territory between Petros and New River, the Daltrey name was known on both sides of the law. Daniel Britton Daltrey was a prominent moonshiner, a man of the traditional mountain economy. On the other side was his relative Bird Daltrey, a deputy sheriff for Anderson County. This set the stage for a classic Appalachian conflict, but with a bitter twist. This was family against family. Tension had been simmering for years. Some family accounts claim Bird Daltrey and his sons William and Fisher were using their badges to extort other moonshiners, demanding a cut of the profits. Daniel Britton Daltrey was reportedly one of the men who refused to pay. The relationship was already poisoned, but an arrest would make it deadly. In early April 1922, Deputy Bird Daltrey arrested his own kin, Daniel's 25-year-old son, Watson. for transporting whiskey. Gunfire was exchanged and 5 gallons of moonshine were seized before Watson was hauled to jail. For Daniel Britton Daughtry, this was the last straw. Family lore says Watson had been arrested and badly beaten by Bird's son years before. After this second arrest, Daniel's family reportedly swore they would kill the officer responsible. On Sunday, April 9, 1922, Deputy Daughtry was walking home from the train station in Petros. He was met on the path by his 2 sons, Fisher and William, who had been worried about him. Now, as the 3 men made their way home, they came face to face with another group on the trail, Daniel Britton Daughtry and his associate, Robert Lowe. What happened next is a tangled web of accusations and conflicting testimony, a hallmark of these mountain feuds. One version claims that Lowe produced fake government papers to try and arrest William Daughtry as a World War I deserter. Another family story claims that Bird reached for his gun and Daniel warned him not to. But most sources agree on one thing. The first shot was fired by Bird's son, Fisher, who aimed at Robert Lowe and missed. In that instant, the quiet mountain path exploded. It was a close, brutal, and personal gun battle between relatives, and when the smoke cleared, 3 men lying dead or dying. Deputy Bird Daughtry and his 2 sons, William and Fisher. They had been ambushed and killed by their own family. Daniel Daughtry and Robert Lowe were arrested and charged. They were convicted, but not of first-degree murder, as many expected. Instead, they were sentenced to 21 years. In a twist that speaks volumes about the nature of justice in the region, both men served only about 7 years before being pardoned by the governor. The violence didn't end there. Daniel's own sons, Walton and Watson, the very man whose arrest triggered the massacre, were said to have lived by the gun and met untimely shooting deaths. The cycle of violence, once started, was nearly impossible to stop. The Daughtry feud is a chilling example of how prohibition and profits and old grudges turned the moonshine business into a war fought within families, blurring the lines between lawman and the outlaw. These stories of betrayal and mountain justice are just one small part of Appalachia's complex history. If you're finding this look into our forgotten past compelling, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. Your support allows us to keep digging up these hidden tales. If the Daughtry affair was a war within a family, the conflict that erupted in Yancey County, North Carolina, was a classic mountain clan feud, where the prize wasn't just honor, but control of the lucrative moonshine trade. This was the violent saga of the McCurry clan and the Peterson family, a story that shows how accusations and retaliation could spiral into a multi-year. The McCurrys, like many families in the region, had a long history of making blockade liquor. The trouble started when authorities were tipped off about their operation. The McCurrys were convinced a rival, Sid Peterson, was the one who had informed on them. In the code of the mountains, being an informant was a capital offense. Of course, snitching wasn't unheard of. It was a risky way to get rid of competition, but an accusation alone could get you killed. The confrontation came to a head on Jack's Creek. Jerome McCurry, younger brother of the clan's leader George McCurry, confronted Sid Peterson. Shots were fired and Jerome McCurry fell dead. Peterson immediately claimed self-defense, a common and often effective defense in the violent culture of the era. For the McCurry clan, though the legal system was something they didn't trust to deliver what they considered true justice, feeling that the law would fail them, they decided to enforce their own. The feud was on. Soon after Jerome's death, bullets were fired into Sid Peterson's house in the dead of the night. Shortly after that, Peterson's barn was burned to the ground, an act of economic warfare. George McCurry was indicted for the arson. George McCurry now became the central figure, described as the terror of several counties. He was a man who embodied the outlaw spirit. Rather than face a trial, he went on the run, eluding capture for nearly a year while waging his war against the Petersons. The Asheville Gazette reported on his reign of terror, comparing him to the legendary outlaws. He was charged with multiple crimes, including 2 murders, though he denied most of them, claiming self-defense. This wasn't just a series of ambushes. It was psychological warfare. The constant threat of violence hung over Yancey County. Every shadow could hide a gunman. This was a conflict fought ridge to ridge, where loyalty was to your kin and the enemy was anyone who threatened your family's honor, or just as importantly, your share of the moonshine market. Tendency to settle disputes with a gun didn't just disappear. The McCurry clan continued to make moonshine for generations, and the tendency to settle disputes with a gun didn't disappear. The last known killing connected to a feud involving the McCurrys apparently occurred as late as the 1950s. The feud shows how the moonshine wars weren't just about honor. They were about controlling the stills, the routes, and the profits. By 1949, the world was changing. World War II was over, and a new wave of prosperity was sweeping America. In the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, this meant the rise of tourism. But just beneath the surface of this idyllic new tourist economy, the old world of moonshine, with its brutality, persisted. The savage double murder at Perry's Camp in September 1949 is a grim monument to this clash of worlds. Perry's Camp was a rustic tourist lodge in Sevier County with cabins, an eatery, and a garage. Its owner was a man named Charlie Perry. Perry was a former Knoxville bootlegger, a man who had lived the life. He'd been in a shootout with a cop and had killed one of his own associates in an accident later ruled self-defense. Looking for a quieter life, he moved to Sevier County and opened his tourist camp. He even displayed a disabled, bullet-riddled copper steel as a kind of lawn ornament, a nod to the region's past for the amusement of the tourist. Living and working with him was his longtime housekeeper and common-law wife, Josie Law. For 20 years, they operated Perry's Camp, catering to visitors. But Charlie Perry's past was not as far behind him as he might have hoped. On the morning of September the 20th, 1949, a bearded delivery man made a horrifying discovery. Inside one of the upstairs bedrooms, he found Josie Law's body. She had been stabbed to death, and when the sheriff arrived, they found Charlie Perry in another room, face down in a pool of his own blood. The scene was one of extreme brutality. Charlie hadn't just been killed, he had been tortured. Josie, it appeared, had been slain, trying to defend him. The viciousness of the crime shocked the community. This wasn't a quick ambush on a dark road. This was a savage, prolonged attack. The investigation quickly focused on 3 local men: Claude Robertson, a career criminal just out of prison, and 2 brothers, Hermie Lee Jones and Basil Jones. Weeks before the murder, a nervous Charlie Perry had pointed out a man in his restaurant to an employee. That man was later identified as Claude Robertson. Robertson and the Jones brothers were arrested. Before a verdict could be reached, Robertson and Hermie Lee Jones struck a deal. They pleaded guilty to both murders and were sentenced to 99 years in prison, while Basil Jones was released. Confessions later revealed the chilling events. Robertson and Jones had forced their way into the quiet camp and tortured Charlie Perry, demanding to know where he kept his money. They ultimately stole around $8,000 before murdering both him and Josie Law. Then they fled and burned their bloody clothes. The Perry Camp murders represent a grim transition. Charlie Perry had tried to straddle two worlds: the fading, violent world of bootlegging and the emerging world of tourism. His murder showed that the brutality of the old ways could be so easily escaped. The crime wasn't about territory or honor in the old school sense. It was about a vicious robbery, driven by pure greed. Yet the connection to illegal money was undeniable. The ex-bootlegger was targeted because his past made it plausible. He had large amounts of untraceable cash. The murders were a brutal reminder that even as the hollers filled with tourists, the dark legacy of the Moonshine Wars was still very much alive. Across all these stories, there's a powerful, unifying thread: the code of silence. It's the answer to the question that hangs over so many of these brutal crimes. Why were they so hard to solve? Why would communities let murderers walk among them? To an outsider, it seems baffling. But in the isolated world of Appalachian moonshiners, this silence wasn't about cowardice. It was a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. For generations, the only law that many trusted was their own. The federal government was often seen as a hostile force, and revenuers weren't protectors. They were invaders who threatened a family's ability to put food on the table. This created a profound and lasting distrust of all outside authority. When a killing happened, especially one related to moonshining, the community often closed ranks. Talking to the sheriff was seen as a betrayal. As the murder of George Powell Jr. showed, being labeled a snitch could get you killed. Your barn could be burned, or you could be ostracized, a fate nearly as bad as death in such a tight-knit community. But the code was never absolute. The reality was more complicated. People were expected to handle their own affairs, which often meant revenge, not legal action. The McCurry-Peterson feud is a perfect example. The McCurrys felt the law failed them, so they took it into their own hands. At the same time, moonshiners frequently informed on their rivals to eliminate competition or settle scores. It was a dangerous game, but it happened. Code of silence was more of a default setting, a shield against the outside world that could be, and often was, lowered for personal advantage within the community. It allowed a shadow justice system to flourish, where ambushes replaced arrests and feuds replaced trials, ensuring that the forgotten Moonshine War would remain just that, forgotten by the outside world, but seared into the memory of the mountains. The era of the great Moonshine Wars has largely faded into Appalachian legend. After World War II, new economic opportunities, the eventual legalization of liquor in many counties, and other factors like rising costs slowly eroded the foundations of the traditional moonshine economy. The old way of life, born of necessity and defended with violence, began to change. The legacy of this forgotten conflict is still etched into the soul of the mountains. It lives on in a lingering distrust of government and outsiders. It echoes in the stories passed down through families, tales of great-grandfathers who ran stills in their deep hollers, and it's reflected in the region's complex relationship with its own identity, one that simultaneously embraces and rejects the outlaw stereotype the moonshine era helped create. Today, moonshine is big business. Legal distilleries across Tennessee and North Carolina sell mason jars of white lightning to tourists, trading on the rebellious image of their predecessors. The names of old moonshining legends are now brands. The site of Perry's Camp, for instance, became a quiet testament to the clash of worlds that define its past. The unsolved murders and bloody feuds serve as a powerful reminder of a time when justice was a personal and often violent affair. They tell a story not just of a crime, but of survival, honor, and a fierce independence. The ghosts of this conflict don't haunt the mountains in the literal sense. They exist in the culture, the stories, and the unshakable character of a people forged in isolation and conflict. And it leaves you with a question. In a place where survival often meant breaking the law and honor demanded silence, what is the true meaning of justice? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe. I'm Matt Cochran. This is The Dark Room.